Good evening, folks. It's Robert Wood from Serendipity Forge again. I'm here this evening just do a little quick video. I had a Facebook friend asked about if I could show how to sharpen knives. Well, the answer to that is no. Most of my sharpening, I set the edge on the belt sander. I use a buffer to bring it up, and then I finish off with a strop. And I'm not going to do all that on a video. And I don't use guides. I do everything by eye and by feel and what feels right. But nonetheless, I do know the math. So we'll talk about the math a little bit. And once you've done a few thousand, you develop a feel for it. And, well, you don't need guides and things like that anymore. But we'll talk about the math on sharpening edges. But before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about edge profile. And you'll have to pardon me if I stutter and stumble a little bit. I'm trying to get this all done in one take. This has been a rough day. It's been a long day. I tried to sand the end of my finger off. I think I partially succeeded. Not a pleasant experience. But anyway, first we'll talk a little bit about edge profile and what you're going to see on most knives today. We'll start off with what's really popular now with the bushcraft community. It's called a Scandi grind, a Scandinavian grind. I use the whiteboard here. My artwork is probably not that great, but that's okay too. So, a Scandi grind has a profile kind of like this. So you've got your spine here, and you've got a fairly wide bit of blade body before the edge starts to taper down. And with the Scandi grind, your bevels are very short. Usually they're very short, and it comes down to a zero edge. Now these are really popular with the bushcraft community. They're really good for shaving sticks, for carving wood, for doing things in a when you're cutting at a very high angle because of the way the because of the way the edge geometry is. This is a very strong edge. Not traditional in my neck of the woods, kind of a new thing, but a lot of people like it, and it does have its bonuses. Like I said, the Scandi is a really strong edge. It's really good for bushcraft work. You can baton that through wood if you need to, if the blade's good. You can use it to split wood. You can use it to shave, to make your fire sticks for fire starting, your fuzz sticks. But that's what a Scandi grind is. So you're going to have a wide area. This is almost a Scandi grind. So let's see if we can get to where you can see that. So we have our blade here. It's very narrow. So then we have a sort of an obtuse angle on the bevel that will come down to a zero edge. This will be almost a zero edge when I'm done sharpening it. This is one of my BT's limited editions. I think it's about the last one in that limited edition set. It's going out to a customer pretty soon. Another thing is the full flat grind, which is pretty much what it sounds like. Your edge geometry is basically a long wedge. The full flat grind runs from the spine down to the edge. And there may or may not be a micro bevel on the edge for the final cutting edge. But the true full flat grind runs on one angle from the spine to the edge. That's a full flat grind. That's all it is. Now, most knives traditionally, at least Western knives, and I don't mean cowboy shoot 'em up, I mean Western culture type knives, are mostly Saber grinds. I do a lot of saber grind, a lot of saber grind blades. The saber grind is almost a compromise between the full flat and the Scandi. So the saber grind will be the flat of the blade, and then your primary bevel has a longer taper down to the cutting edge, and then there's usually going to be a micro bevel here on the cutting edge that is your final edge. That's the most common type of edge you're going to see on anything. That's the most common edge geometry that you're going to see. That's mostly what I do. That's mostly what everybody does. This little EDC knife, it's kind of hard to see on this one because it's been acid etched, but the primary bevel starts right here and runs down. This one isn't sharp, it's not finished yet, but there will be a micro bevel here for the final cutting edge. And the flat of the blade runs right through here. This is what I would call a high saber, because the bevel runs so far toward the spine that it's almost full flat, but not quite. I'd call this a high saber grind. This one the same. And this one you can more see where the spine and the primary bevel. You can see the line there where the primary bevel drops off from the spine, from the body of the blade. I'd call this a high saber. This is my terms. I'm sure somebody else out there disagree with me, say that's not what that's called at all. Okay, bud, tomato, tomato. You call it what you want to. I call it what I want to, but I call it a high saber. If I were going to make this knife with a real saber grind, I would have brought the primary bevel down about halfway, then dropped off, and then had a micro bevel along the edge. And no, this one isn't sharp either. Now, still a lot of these blades around. A lot of people love them. When I was a kid, which was probably, I don't know, somewhere around 500-600 years ago, the big popular thing back then was the hollow grind. And there are still a lot of hologram knives out there. And they do serve a purpose. The hollow grind, a lot of times, is going to be like the Saber. You're going to have the flat of the blade come down, and then your primary bevel is concave into the cutting edge. The primary advantage this has is that this makes a very sharp knife. Because of this bevel and the sweep in, you have a much shallower angle at the cutting edge than you have here or here or here. Very sharp knife, very good for slicing, very good for processing game. Personally, I don't like them. Somebody's going to cuss at me and say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're an idiot. Well, maybe I am. Again, tomato, tomato. You like hollow grinds? I don't like hollow grinds. Hollow grinds to me make a weak edge. And no knife is any good if the edge isn't sharp. If all you're going to do with it is cut paper or skin animals or cut meat or slice tomatoes, then that hollow grind is going to be fine. But if you're going to use that blade for general purposes, if you're going to use it in heavy game processing and you might hit a bone or anything like that, you don't want that hollow grind. I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot because hollow grinds are a lot easier. Personally, I find hollow grinds a lot easier to do than the flat or the Saber or the Scandi, because with the hollow grind, once you get your initial pass, that the hollow part will set right on the contact wheel on the grinder and it will guide itself right across. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's easy, but I don't like them. Doesn't matter if it's easy to me. If it's not what I think is going to be good for you, I'm not going to do it. I don't do holograms very much. But that's pretty much the common types of edge geometry that we find in, or blade geometry that we find in the common Western knives. Now, occasionally you will find, and this is usually in Eastern type knives, a chisel grind in which the edge has a single bevel that runs from the flat to the cutting edge. You see this a lot on Eastern knives, on Japanese knives, and this bevel oftentimes is a very low angle, and these knives are super for cutting, for slicing. But with this blade, when you slice with it, you only slice to one side. So you either got a right-handed or a left-handed knife. They're great for slicing. They're fabulous for like sushi work or something that you want to slice super thin. Those are great. I make a few of them. This is chisel ground, and it is very sharp. Let's see, I don't know if I can get that in the camera. One of these days I'll get a real camera. But this blade is very sharp. It will do a lot of fine slicing. But it's a trade-off. That shallow angle makes the edge weak. So that's all I'm going to talk about as far as edge profile goes. Now, to talk about just shortly about the actual sharpening part. The important part of the knife edge is what is your angle on the cutting edge. And actually it depends on what are you going to use the blade for. If you are going to use the blade for, oh, let me go back. Sorry, I missed one. The last type of edge geometry is the convex grind. So, convex, and this is done on a slack belt on the grinder. This makes probably the strongest edge of any of these. But the edge is very obtuse, and while you can still have this sharp enough to shave with, you won't do any fine slicing with this. This edge geometry is great for choppers, great for cleavers, great for heavy use camp knives, things where you're going to put a lot of abuse on that edge, cutting things that maybe you ought to be cutting with an axe instead of a knife. That's the kind of edge geometry you want. As far as angles go, again, what's the use of your knife? Let's say if you have a saber grind, you want a general use knife with a saber grind. You want a general use knife that you're going to use for camp chores, for maybe whittling a little bit, maybe use it for some game processing, use it for some kitchen tasks, just going to use it for just whatever. Don't have a set purpose for that knife. Then what you're looking for is about an 18 to 25 degree angle. 18 to 25 degree angle on the edge. So you want your edge to be, well, great. I've only got one dry erase marker in the house and it's running low. You want your edge angle to be 18 to 25 degrees. This should be the angle If you've got a Saber, then it's going to be the angle of your secondary bevel. If you've got a Scandi, then probably on towards 25 degrees for the angle of your full bevel, because remember, this comes to a 0 edge. Full flat, you may have a micro bevel to bring it to this angle for a general use knife. This is going to be a really strong edge, and it's still going to be sharp enough to handle most tasks without damaging the edge. If I were going to have a general use knife, my absolute, sorry, my dogs are losing their mind. My absolute favorite angle would be somewhere around 23 degrees. It's good enough. Anything less than 18 degrees, you're moving back towards what would be a fine slicing blade. So 17 degrees on back down to say 5. When you're talking about 5, 10 degrees angle on an edge, you're talking about razors. When you're talking about anywhere from say 10 to 15 degrees, then you're talking about very fine slicing knives. Like, I can't think of anything I could do with that outside the kitchen or outside an operating suite. Very fine slicing knives. Now, 25 to 35 degrees on your edge angle would be perfect for heavy use. Choppers, machetes, that big camp knife that you may abuse doing something. That's the kind of angle that you want on that. And that angle will do everything that you want to do, and it won't take the damage that a knife with a lesser angle will. And it'll take more wear, and it'll just be more durable. But to answer the question, suit your angle for your knife. If you want a fine slicer, drop your angle back. 10 degrees, 15 degrees, beautiful, great. A good universal general use knife, 18 to 25 degrees. Anything 25 and 35 degrees, absolutely heavy use, chopping, busting logs, things like that. So, sorry I couldn't get any more specific for you, and don't take anything that I said as the gospel, because in spite of what anybody tells you, anybody comes up and tells you this is absolutely the way it is, well, no. Might be the way it is for that guy. All I can do is just give you some guidelines. You go find your own way. Find out what works for you. Get out there, swing a hammer, and make something beautiful. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, leave us a comment in the comment section with some suggestions for future content. Be glad to help. Be glad to make what I can. Maybe my next video will be a little more professional, and I won't be so stumbly and bumbly in what I'm saying. But I'm not going to sit and rehearse it. When I'm talking to you, you're going to get it just plain out live as it is. I hope everybody out there has a blessed night. Stay safe, stay warm, stay dry, stay healthy. God bless you all. Good night.